You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The quiet man at the door didn't ring the bell the way ordinary callers do. One firm press, and then the patient shuffle that says they've handed their dignity to the house and are waiting to see if it gets returned. He rang like a lawyer. 2 short touches, then a pause, then a third, as if he had remembered that time was money. And the stoop was neither. Fritz opened the door, took one look at the hat and overcoat and the careful eyes, and admitted him with the particular politeness he reserves for men who will not be improved by rudeness. I was in the front room with the morning mail spread on the table and a cup of coffee that was already losing its bravery. Outside, December was practicing its worst manners. Wind off the river, the sky the color of old pewter, and the sidewalk full of people walking fast to pretend they weren't cold. The visitor handed Fritz a card. Fritz brought it to me. "Mr. Wolfe is in the plant rooms," he said softly. "This gentleman says it is urgent." I read the card, Harlan Quayle, attorney at law. The address was uptown, the typeface expensive, the name slightly smug. I looked past Fritz and saw Quayle standing in the hall, hat in hand, face composed the way a man composes it when he expects his words to be weighed and billed. "Come on in," I said. "If you're urgent, you might as well be urgent where it counts." He stepped into the front room, shook my hand with careful pressure, and said, "Mr. Goodwin, that's me. Mr. Wolfe is upstairs breathing orchids. Sit down and rehearse your crisis." He sat spine straight, hands on his knees as if a chair were a witness stand. "I need Mr. Wolfe," he said, "at once." "You and half the city," I said. "Try a sentence with nouns." His jaw tightened. Lawyers don't like being coached, but he tried. "My client, Mr. Cal Mercer, is dead." That got my attention in a practical way. Dead clients are bad for business and excellent for detective work. "Found how?" I asked. "In his study," Quayle said. "Last night. No sign of forced entry, no robbery. The safe intact, the household in shock." "Household," I repeated. "That means staff." "Family?" Quayle hesitated, then said, "No family living in the house. Mr. Mercer lived alone, with servants." "Rich men do," I said. "It saves them from arguments and adds them to other people's wills." Quayle didn't smile. "There is a complication." "A dead man is usually a complication," I said. "But I assume you mean a special one." He nodded once. "A servant, Ezra Mott. He witnessed something deadly, and now he will not speak." I leaned back. "Won't speak or can't. He is physically capable. The doctor says there is no injury. But since the body was found, he has been silent, not one word." "That's dramatic," I said. "Servants don't go dramatic without a reason. They go resigned." Quayle's eyes met mine, exactly. "Mr. Mott has been with my client 26 years. He is reliable, discreet, and not theatrical. His silence is not confusion. It is a decision." That line would have pleased Wolfe. I made a note to pretend I'd thought of it. "Why come to Wolfe?" I asked. "Why not the police?" Quayle's mouth tightened, and there it was, the lawyer's natural suspicion of uniforms. "The police have been notified," he said. "They are investigating. But Mr. Mercer's affairs are extensive. There are contracts, trusts, business interests. My responsibility is to protect his estate." "And your fee?" I said. He accepted that without blinking, and to protect the living members of his staff. If Ezra Mott knows what happened and will not speak, there is a danger he will be pressured, or that he will act on his own. "Servants acting on their own is always dangerous," I said. "They know where the knives are." Quayle's eyes flicked toward the stairs. "Mr. Wolfe's reputation is for reason, for making people speak without force." "I wouldn't put it exactly that way," I said, "but it's close enough to charge." Fritz appeared in the doorway with the faintest lift of his brows, which meant Wolfe had returned from the plant rooms and had decided to be disturbed. I stood, Come on, Mr. Quayle. We'll go see the large brain in its natural habitat. Wolfe was in the office behind his desk, huge and contained, the way a boulder looks when it has learned to wear a suit. The room smelled of leather, old paper, and the faint, disciplined perfume of orchids drifting down the stairs. Wolfe's idea of civilization, carefully cultivated against a world he considered mostly barbaric. He looked up as we entered, eyes half-lidded. He knew Quayle's type before Quayle had opened his mouth. "Mr. Wolfe," Quayle began. Wolfe lifted a hand. "Sit, speak, do not waste words." Quayle sat on the red leather chair as if it might charge him rent. I took my usual spot, ready to be the sensible part of the brain. Quayle repeated the essentials. Cleaner this time, Cal Mercer dead in his study. No forced entry, no theft, a household staff, and one man, Ezra Mott, who had witnessed something and was now mute by choice. Wolfe listened without blinking, which is always disconcerting. When Quayle finished, Wolfe took a breath that sounded almost like a sigh and then asked one question. "How did Mr. Mercer die?" Quayle hesitated. "The preliminary opinion is heart failure." I waited for Wolfe's explosion. It didn't come. Wolfe merely raised his eyebrows a fraction. "And yet," Wolfe said, "you have said deadly twice. Heart failure is deadly, but it is not usually witnessed in the way you imply. Explain." Quayle's fingers tightened on the hat in his lap. There was a glass on the desk. Whiskey. The doctor said there was an unusual odor. They suspect poison, but they cannot yet confirm it. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Poison is rarely administered without intent. Who found the body?" "The housekeeper," Quayle replied. "Mrs. Delavane. She went in to clear the study after dinner." Mr. Mercer was at his desk. He was slumped. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. "And Ezra Mott?" Quayle swallowed. He was outside the study door, standing. He had been there, apparently, since dinner. When Mrs. Vane screamed, he did not react. He simply looked at her and then closed his mouth. Wolfe's gaze flicked to me, then back to Quayle. "Your phrasing is odd." Quayle's face tightened. "It is accurate. Mr. Mott spoke one sentence to the police. One, and then he stopped." "What sentence?" Wolfe asked. Quayle hesitated again, as if reluctant to give away a detail that could cost him advantage. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Quayle." Quayle surrendered. He said, "The master chose his own end." Silence settled in Wolfe's office like dust. I said, "That's poetic for a servant." Quayle nodded. And then he refused to answer any questions. "He will not speak to police. He will not speak to me. He will not speak to anyone. He only looks." Wolfe leaned back slightly, fingertips touching. "Mr. Mott's silence," he said, "is not emptiness. It is a choice with a shape." Quayle exhaled, as if grateful to hear his fear translated into Wolfe's language. Wolfe continued, "If he has chosen silence, he has chosen a purpose, either to protect himself, to protect another, or to punish someone by withholding information." Quayle's eyes widened. "Exactly. And my client's house is full of people who now suspect each other." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "How many people were in the house last night?" Quayle consulted his memory. "Mrs. Vane, the housekeeper, a cook, Mrs. Innes, 2 maids, a chauffeur, Ezra Mott, and Mr. Mercer himself." Wolfe's eyes stayed steady. "Any visitors?" Quayle hesitated. "Yes, a business associate came for dinner, Mr. Clay Reddick." I kept my face neutral, but my mind made a small click. Names repeat in New York the way diseases do. Reddick was a name that belonged to clean smiles and dirty ledgers. If it was the same Reddick, and in my experience, the city didn't waste good villains. Wolfe's eyes moved slightly, the way they do when a detail catches. "Clay Reddick," he repeated. "Occupation?" "Director of a philanthropic foundation," Quayle said quickly. He and Mr. Mercer were involved in charitable projects. "Charity?" I murmured. "That word again." Wolfe ignored me. "When did Mr. Reddick depart?" "After dinner," Quayle said. "Around 9, Mr. Mercer went to his study afterward, As was his habit, Ezra Mott says he saw him enter and close the door. And the door was found locked? Wolfe asked. Yes, Quayle said. From the inside, Mrs. Vane had to use a key. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That is inconvenient. It is, Quayle agreed. That is why. That is why you are here. Wolfe finished. Yes. He sat forward slightly. Mr. Quayle, do you wish me to discover who killed Mr. Mercer, or do you wish me to persuade Ezra Mott to speak? Quayle blinked. Both. Wolfe's expression suggested Quayle had requested the moon delivered with garnish. You will choose, Quayle swallowed. If Ezra Mott speaks, the police may. They may do their job, Wolfe said, and you may do yours. But if Mr. Mott remains silent, you have a servant holding a weapon you cannot see. That is dangerous to you and to others. Quayle's voice went soft. Then, persuade him. Wolfe nodded once. Decision made. Very well, Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to Mr. Mercer's house. I will not. I opened my mouth. Wolfe lifted a finger. You will observe, Wolfe said to me, and you will report. You will speak to Ezra Mott. You will not badger him. You will see what he chooses not to say. That is often more useful. I said, Yes, sir. Quayle looked faintly disappointed. People always are when they learn Wolfe solves crimes without leaving his chair. Wolfe added, Mr. Quayle, if there is poison involved, you will inform the police laboratory results to Inspector Kramer at once. I do not tolerate delays when the subject is murder. Quayle nodded quickly. Of course. Wolfe's gaze sharpened again. And you will bring to my attention any document, Mr. Mercer, signed in the last month. Wills, codicils, trust amendments, contracts. A man does not choose his own end without leaving a paper trail. Quayle's face tightened, but he nodded. I will. Wolfe settled back, dismissing us with the same finality he uses when ending a meal. Go. In the hall as Quayle put on his coat, I said. One question, Counselor. Why did you call him the quiet man at the door? Quayle blinked. I didn't. You will, I said. Because if Ezra Mott is silent on purpose, he's not quiet. He's loud. We just haven't learned the language yet. Quayle didn't like that, but he didn't argue. Lawyers dislike metaphors when they aren't billing for them. We stepped out into the December wind, and I glanced up at Wolfe's brownstone, warm behind us, and thought, no forced entry, a locked study, a servant who says the master chose his own end, and a guest named Clay Reddick with a clean smile. It was going to be one of those cases where everybody has an alibi and nobody has a soul. And somewhere uptown, a man named Ezra Mott was holding his silence like a loaded gun. Chapter 2. Mercer's place sat on the east side, the way a fat cat sits on a cushion, secure, satisfied, and not interested in the weather. The iron fence had points sharp enough to discourage Christmas cheer, and the stone faifee looked as if it had been washed daily by a man in a suit. Even in the raw December wind, the house managed to feel warm, but it was the warmth of money holding its breath. Quayle got us in past a uniform at the gate and another at the front steps. The second one had the hard look of a cop assigned to guard a corpse and resentful that the corpse lived better than he did. Inside, the air was too still. A mansion has its own silence even when it's full of people, because everything soft carpet, drapes, furniture, has been purchased to absorb sound. The result is that footsteps become confidential and voices instinctively drop as if the walls have lawyers. A policeman led us down a wide hall toward a doorway that stood open like a mouth that didn't want to admit it had swallowed something. I saw Kramer first, bulky in his overcoat, planted in the doorway with his hands on his hips and his face arranged into what he thinks is authority. When he saw me, he grunted. Goodwin, where's the fat one? Breathing orchids, I said. They're easier to reason with than homicide. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Tell him he can't reason his way out of giving me evidence. I'll tell him you miss him, I said, and stepped past him into the study. The room was exactly what you'd order if you wanted to be murdered. In comfort, heavy desk, leather chairs, walls lined with books that had probably never been opened, and a fireplace big enough to roast a small ox. The scent was old tobacco and polished wood and something sharper that made the back of my throat tighten. On the desk sat a cut, glass tumbler with a finger of amber liquid still in it. Next to it was a small bottle of pills. Open a lamp with a green shade cast a pool of light that made the rest of the room look darker by contrast. Cal Mercer's body was gone. That was a mercy, but the outlines remained, a faint scuff on the rug where the chair had been shoved back, a smudge on the edge of the desk that looked like a hand had gripped and slipped. Kramer jerked his head at the glass. Nightcap, poisoned. Quayle's voice was careful. The lab. Kramer's mouth twisted. Not the full report yet, but the doc at the scene said bitter almond smell, cyanide probably, enough to drop an ox. Mercer liked drama, Quayle murmured, and then caught himself and looked uncomfortable, as if remembering the dead man had paid his bills. I leaned closer to the desk without touching anything. No forced entry, I said. Kramer snorted. No forced entry. Door was locked from the inside. Window latch untouched, the safe untouched. Nice, tidy puzzle. And the lock, I said. Show me. Kramer took me to the door. It was a thick oak door with a brass knob and a deadbolt above it. The bolt was the old-fashioned kind that turned, not the modern kind that clicks. Locked, Kramer said. From inside. Housekeeper used her key. Bolt was turned. No sign it was jimmied. That means either Mercer locked it and drank, I said, or someone locked it after. Kramer glared. That's why I'm here, Archie. I know the options I need. Which one happened? Quayle stepped in. Inspector Ezra Mott. Yeah, Kramer growled. The stone statue. He nodded toward the hall. Ezra Mott stood there as if he had been placed by a decorator and forgotten. He was tall, spare, and grey, haired, wearing a dark suit that fit without flair. His hands were folded at his waist, not in prayer but in control. His face was calm, but his eyes were not calm. They were alert, tracking every movement the way a watchman tracks. Shadows. A uniformed cop spoke to him, low and patient, and Mott simply looked at him. No nod, no shake of the head, no sign he'd heard. He might as well have been deaf, except that his eyes flicked, quick, when someone said Mercer's name. Quayle approached him with the cautious respect of a man approaching an unstable witness. Ezra, Quayle said softly. This is Mr. Archie Goodwin, from Mr. Wolfe's office. Mott's eyes shifted to me and held. There was nothing blank in them. There was calculation. He wasn't refusing to speak because he couldn't. He was refusing because every word would be a lever. I gave him my most ordinary smile. Mr. Mott. He didn't respond, but his gaze moved to my hands, then my face again, as if checking whether I carried weapons. I did. They were mostly verbal. Kramer came up behind me. Mott, I'm Inspector Kramer, and you're going to answer questions. Mott's eyes slid to Kramer with mild contempt. That was the first emotion he'd shown, and it was almost refreshing. Kramer's voice rose. You were here. You stood outside this door. You told my men the master chose his own end. What the hell does that mean? Mott looked at him. He did not blink. He did not speak. Kramer swore. You think you're protecting someone. You think you're being loyal. You're obstructing. Mott's eyes flicked past Kramer to the study door, then back. It was a small movement, but it was deliberate. He was pointing without pointing. I said quietly, Inspector. Kramer turned on me. What? If you bark at him, you'll just hear your own echo, I said. Let me try. Kramer's face reddened. Try. And don't touch anything. I stepped in front of Mott, close enough to speak softly, without being overheard by every uniform in the hall. Mr. Mott, I said, Mr. Wolfe thinks your silence is evidence. That got a reaction, not much, just a tightening around the eyes. But it was there. I went on. He said if you're choosing silence, you're choosing a purpose, protecting yourself, protecting someone else, or punishing someone by withholding the truth. Mott's gaze held mine. For a second I thought he might speak. His throat moved once like a swallow of words. He didn't, but his eyes shifted, briefly, to the left, toward a closed door farther down the hall. Then they returned to me and stayed there, steady as a warning. I followed the glance without moving my head too obviously. The door had a brass plate, servant's pantry. I looked back at Mott. You want us to look there? He didn't nod, but his hands, folded at his waist, tightened slightly, knuckles whitening under skin, then relaxed. A signal as small as a breath. Kramer saw none of it. He was too busy vibrating with indignation. Quayle said, "Ezra, for heaven's sake." Wolfe's voice arrived then, not in person but through Quayle's pocket. Quayle's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and answered quickly, "Yes, Mr. Wolfe. Yes. We are here. Inspector Kramer is present." "Yes." He held the phone out toward me. "Mr. Wolfe wants you." I took it. "Wolfe." His voice was calm and therefore dangerous. "Report." "Poison in the nightcap," I said. Study door locked from inside. No forced entry. Household full of alibis. And Ezra Mott is still silent, but not empty. He just pointed me at the servant's pantry door with his eyes. A pause. I could hear Wolfe thinking, which is always like hearing a safe click. Then Wolfe said, "Good. His silence is evidence. And now it has direction. Do not ignore it." "I won't," I said. "Kramer's trying." Wolfe's tone sharpened slightly. "Tell Inspector Kramer that if he wishes my assistance, he will cease his bellowing and allow my assistant to work." "Gladly," I said. I turned and handed the phone to Kramer, who took it like it might stain his fingers. "Wolfe," Kramer barked. Wolfe's voice, even through the tiny speaker, made the hall seem quieter. "Inspector, you are interfering." Kramer's mouth opened. Wolfe continued. "If you want results, restrain yourself. Mr. Goodwin is about to receive them." Kramer glared at the phone, then at me, then growled, "Fine," and thrust it back as if it burned. Quayle said, tense, "What now?" I looked at Ezra Mott. "Now," I said, "we listen to what he isn't saying." I walked toward the servant's pantry door. Behind me, Ezra Mott's eyes followed, steady and intent, as if the next minute would decide whether his silence was loyalty or a confession. And when my hand closed on the pantry knob, I felt very clearly that someone else in that quiet house was holding their breath too. Chapter 3. The servant's pantry door opened on a smell of coffee, lemon polish, and old obedience. The room itself was narrow and tidy, shelves of china, a counter with a sink, hooks for aprons. Everything had a place and everything looked as if it had been scrubbed in self-defense. I didn't need a bloodhound to tell me someone had been in there after the body was found. A chair was slightly out of line with the table edge, and the bottom drawer of the sideboard didn't sit flush. In a house where even the dust looked disciplined, a crooked drawer is practically a confession. Kramer hovered in the doorway with 2 uniforms behind him, trying to look like a man letting me work, when in fact he was simply afraid I would work without him. I pulled the drawer open. Inside were napkins, silver polish, a handful of rubber bands, and a small glass vial, the kind you'd get from a pharmacy. The label was half torn, but enough remained to read potassium and a dose instruction in neat type. There was a faint, bitter odor when I uncapped it, like almonds that had learned to hate. I didn't touch the inside. I didn't have to. The presence of the vial in a servant's pantry was like finding a rattlesnake in a linen closet. It didn't belong unless someone put it there on purpose. Kramer grunted. Well, don't celebrate," I said. "That could be a plant." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Everything's a plant with you and Wolfe. In nice houses, Inspector. Even the poison is landscaped," I said. Quayle stepped in, face tight. "That isn't ours. I've never seen." "You don't shine silver," I told him. "You bill." I glanced down the hall. Ezra Mott stood where he'd been standing, hands folded, face calm, eyes alive. He was watching me, not pleading, not warning, simply watching, as if he had pushed a pawn forward and was waiting to see if I understood the board. I did, partly. I held up the vial so Ezra could see it without anyone thinking I was showing it to him. His eyes didn't change, but his left hand tightened once at his waist, then relaxed. A tiny motion, approval or resignation. Kramer snapped at a uniform. "Bag it, lab, now." As the officer moved, I kept my voice level. "Inspector, this doesn't prove who used it. It proves it was accessible." Kramer grunted. "It proves motive too. Somebody didn't want Mercer to talk." "That's one motive," I said. "Or somebody wanted Mercer to stop talking." Quayle looked sick. "Mr. Wolfe, what will he do?" "He'll do what he always does," I said. "He'll sit in his chair and make everyone else sweat truth." Within an hour we were back at the brownstone, and Wolfe had done exactly that, arranged the office like a courtroom without needing a judge's robe. The red chair sat ready for the next liar. The yellow chair waited for the one who would pretend to be honest. Fritz moved in and out with coffee that nobody drank, because no one enjoys caffeine when murder is in the room. Wolfe had summoned the inner circle to come downtown. Quayle had called them. Kramer had protested. Wolfe had ignored him. The result, near 3 in the afternoon, was that Nero Wolfe's office contained 6 people who would rather have been anywhere else. Paige Mercer sat on the yellow chair with her legs crossed and her posture too straight. She was in her early 30s, dressed like a woman who had money and wanted the world to apologize for noticing. Her eyes were sharp, but there was grief in them. Real grief, I decided, but concentrated into anger because anger is easier to wear in public. Todd Mercer sat in the red chair and managed to look both smug and nervous at the same time. He was younger, late 20s, and had the restless hands of a man who spends his life asking for advances. He kept smiling as if a smile might prevent questions from landing. Carla Wynne, the nurse, sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap. She had the calm face of someone who has seen bodies and doesn't romanticize them. Her uniform was plain, her hair pinned back, her eyes watchful. Hank Red, estate manager, stood at the far end of the room as if he didn't trust furniture. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried his competence like a badge. Men like him run houses and businesses for rich people and quietly resent the rich for needing them. And Ezra Mott stood near the door. Wolfe's choice, not his. Hands folded, face composed, refusing to be part of the seating chart. He looked like a man who could have been carved from the banister of Cal Mercer's staircase. Wolfe regarded them all as if he were selecting cuts of meat. "This will proceed efficiently," Wolfe said. "You will answer, you will not perform. If you attempt to deceive me, I will discover it, and you will regret the attempt." Todd's smile faltered. Paige's chin lifted. Hank Red's lips tightened. Carla Wynne merely blinked once, as if acknowledging a rule she already lived by. Wolfe began with Paige. "Miss Mercer," he said, "you are Mr. Cal Mercer's daughter." "Yes," Paige said crisply. "You were not living in the house. Number, when did you arrive?" "This morning," she said. "From Boston." Kramer, perched on a chair near the door, snorted. "Convenient." Paige's eyes flashed at him. "My father and I weren't close. That doesn't make me a murderer." Wolfe's voice stayed calm. "It makes you a possibility. Why were you not close?" Paige's mouth tightened. "Because he preferred control to affection." Wolfe nodded, as if that were common knowledge. "Where were you last night at 9 o'clock?" "In Boston," she said. "At a dinner. There are witnesses." Wolfe turned a fraction. "Mr. Red, you manage Mr. Mercer's estate." Hank Red's voice was smooth. "I managed his affairs." "Yes. You were at the house last night." "Yes. I left at 8:30. "Why?" Hank's gaze stayed steady. "Because my business was finished. Mr. Mercer insisted on being alone after dinner." "And dinner included a guest," Wolfe said. "Mr. Todd Mercer, nephew." Todd straightened. "Yes, sir." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do not call me sir. State your relationship and your movements." Todd swallowed. "I'm his sister's son. I came by for dinner. We talked. I left around 9. "You left when?" Wolfe asked, and the repetition was a knife. Todd's smile returned, smaller. "Around 9, maybe a little after." "Did you go into the study?" Todd shook his head quickly. Number Uncle Cal didn't like anyone in there. Wolfe's gaze slid to Carla Wynne. Miss Wynne, you were employed as a nurse. Yes, she said. For whom? For Mr. Mercer, she replied. He had heart trouble. He didn't like hospitals. He liked control. Page's eyes shifted at that, and Wolfe saw it. What medication did you administer? Wolfe asked. Carla's answer was precise. A beta blocker in the morning, a mild sedative at night if he requested it, nothing else unless his doctor ordered it. Did he request it last night? Carla nodded. Yes, after dinner, at about 8:45. Todd's eyes widened slightly, then smoothed out again. Wolfe asked, who was present when you gave it to him? Carla glanced briefly toward Hank Red, then toward Page, then back to Wolfe. Mr. Mercer and I. He was alone in the sitting room. Not Mr. Todd? Wolfe asked. No, Carla said. Mr. Todd was still in the dining room finishing coffee with Mrs. Vane, I believe. Todd's smile tightened. That's right. Wolfe turned to Hank Red. You said you left at 8:30. Miss Wynne implies you remained later. Hank Red didn't flinch, but I saw his neck muscle tighten. I did not leave the premises until 8:50, he corrected smoothly. I was completing a phone call in the downstairs office. Wolfe's eyes held his. So your first statement was inaccurate. It was approximate, Hank said. I'm not under oath. You are under scrutiny, Wolfe replied. That is more reliable. Kramer made a sound, but Wolfe ignored it. Wolfe leaned back slightly and surveyed the room. Each of you has offered a tidy truth. You were here, you were there, you heard nothing, you touched nothing. The house is full of clean hands. Page's voice was brittle. Are you accusing us all? I am observing you, Wolfe said. Accusation is premature. He shifted his gaze to Ezra Mott. Mr. Mott. Ezra did not move. Wolfe's voice sharpened a fraction. You told the police. The master chose his own end. Explain. Ezra's eyes remained on Wolfe. His mouth remained closed. Todd exhaled sharply. He's been like that all day. He won't say a word. Page's eyes flashed. He knows something, Hank Red said, controlled. Ezra always knows everything that happens in that house. Carla Wynne's voice was quiet. People talk around him. They forget he hears. Wolfe nodded once. Then his silence is evidence. He stood, only a little, shifting his bulk forward, and fixed Ezra with a stare that would have made most men confess to stealing umbrellas. Mr. Mott, Wolfe said, you are not empty. You are deliberate. You are withholding speech, because speech would harm someone you have chosen to protect. Ezra's eyes flicked, tiny toward the red chair, toward Todd Mercer. It was the kind of glance a dog gives a boot that kicked it, not fear, not affection, but a steady watchfulness that says, I remember. Todd noticed it. His smile vanished completely. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Ezra looked at him, still silent. But the look was not neutral. It was old, and it was hard. Wolfe's voice was mild. It means, Mr. Todd Mercer, that you have been noticed. Todd's face reddened. This is ridiculous. He hates me because I told Uncle Cal he needed to fire him years ago. Ezra never forgave me. Page's voice snapped. Why would you tell him to fire Ezra? Todd stammered. Because I thought he was old. He was too controlling. Hank Red's eyes narrowed. Ezra controlling. That's rich. Carla Wynne didn't speak, but her gaze moved from Todd to Page and back, as if measuring who would break first. Wolfe sat back down, satisfied, and looked at me. That look meant, you saw it too. Now use it. I said, all right, here's what I've got so far. Poison in a glass locked study, no forced entry, and a household that talks too much and says too little. Ezra Mott won't speak, but he's watching Todd like Todd owes him pain. Todd snapped, I don't owe him anything. Wolfe's voice cut through. You owe him a reason. Todd's breath hitched. Page's eyes sharpened. Hank Red's hands clenched once and relaxed. Carla Wynn's expression stayed calm, but her eyes went colder. Wolfe folded his fingers together. "Mr. Goodwin will return to the house," he said. "He will examine the study door, the servants' pantry, and the routines of last night, with attention to what is not said. Inspector Kramer will, I trust, refrain from sabotaging this with noise." Kramer growled. "I'm not sabotaging." Wolfe ignored him. "And you," he said to the group, "will remain available. Your tidy truths will be tested. Mr. Mott's silence will be interpreted, and the one he watches." Wolfe's eyes slid to Todd. "We'll find that being watched by a silent man is more uncomfortable than being questioned by a loud one." Ezra Mott said nothing, but his eyes never left Todd Mercer. And Todd Mercer, for the first time since he'd entered Wolfe's office, looked like a man who wished silence were contagious. Chapter 4. If Cal Mercer's mansion had a pulse, it was in the hallway outside the study. Everything important happened there. Who passed, who paused, who lingered, who behaved as if nothing in the world had changed while a man inside was dying. That afternoon I went back uptown with Quayle, because a lawyer is a convenient passport in rich houses. Kramer was still there too, like a bad smell that had paid rent. He greeted me with a grunt that meant he hadn't improved his opinion of me during lunch. "You find anything useful?" he asked. "I found you," I said. "That's useful for keeping expectations low." He snorted and waved me toward the study. The room looked the same as it had in the morning, orderly, expensive, and wrong by inches. A murder scene is always wrong by inches. If it's wrong by feet, it's a brawl. Inches means planning. I started with the desk, one glass. Not two, that mattered. A man who entertains a guest in his study doesn't pour one drink and then drink it alone while the other watches. If there had been company in that room, the company was either not offered a drink or had made sure not to leave evidence of one. The decanter sat on a silver tray, half full cut glass catching the winter light, like a grin. The stopper was seated properly. No smudges on the neck where a frantic hand might have grabbed it. If poison had been added to the glass, it had been done calmly. On the edge of the desk was the small medicine bottle Carla Wynn had mentioned, with its cap replaced neatly. The kind of neat that looks innocent until you remember that neatness can be staged. On the hearth by the fireplace, a poker rested on its stand, not tossed, not leaned, placed. I stared at it longer than I should have, because I've learned that weapons don't always hit. Sometimes they just threaten. Kramer saw me looking. "Poker didn't do it," he said. "No marks, no blood, just a damn poker." "Nothing is just anything in a room where a man died," I said. I went to the window, big, heavy sash overlooking a landscaped backyard that looked like it had never been allowed to grow wild enough for a squirrel to get ideas. I tested the latch, tight. I ran a fingertip along the sill. Dust, a fine layer, undisturbed, the kind that settles when windows are never opened because fresh air might wrinkle drapes. No smears, no fingerprints, no sign of a midnight escape route. I looked back at the door. "So the window's out," I muttered. Quayle, hovering behind me, said, "Mr. Mercer disliked open windows." "Lucky for his killer," I said. "It means nobody would expect one to be opened now." Kramer crossed his arms. Door was locked from inside. "Right," I said. "So either Mercer locked it and drank his poison like a man taking medicine, or somebody locked it after he dropped." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "You got a third option?" "Not yet," I said. "But I'm shopping." I stepped into the hallway and stood exactly where Ezra Mott had stood the night before. The angle gave you a view down to the front stairs and up toward the servants' wing. You could see who came and went. You could also be seen by everyone, which meant Ezra's post had been both sentinel and warning. Mrs. Delavane, the housekeeper, appeared as if summoned by the sound of questions. She had a face built for disapproval and a posture built for long service. "Mr. Goodwin," she said tightly, "is this necessary? We have had enough disturbance." "Necessary is my hobby," I told her. "Mrs. Vane, tell me the exact routine last night after dinner." She gave it to me in crisp bullets. Coffee served. Guest departed. Mr. Mercer retired. Ezra took his station. Carla Wynne delivered the sedative. The staff cleaned the dining room. Lights were checked. Doors were secured. All doors? I asked. She stiffened. Of course. Even the service entrance? I asked. She hesitated. Just a blink of it. Kramer leaned forward. What about the service entrance? Mrs. Vane's chin lifted. It was secured, always. Was it tested? I asked. Her eyes snapped to mine. Tested. An alarm can be tested, I said. Sometimes by the people who own it. Sometimes by people who want to know whether it works. Kramer barked. We got security logs. Goodwin, no intruders. Show me, I said. Kramer didn't like taking orders from me, but he liked being right. So he led me to the small security office off the kitchen, where a panel blinked like a nervous conscience. A log sheet lay on the desk. No forced entry. No alarms tripped overnight. No window sensors triggered, but at 2:30 in the afternoon, hors before dinner. A notation sat there like a fly in milk. Service entrance alarm test. Passed. I tapped it. Who tested it? The security guard, a man with the bored eyes of a professional watcher. Shifted. Estate manager asked for it. Hank read. Said Mr. Mercer wanted everything checked. Did Mr. Mercer say that? I asked. The guard shrugged. Mr. Red said he did. We don't argue. Kramer grunted. That's standard. Rich folks get jittery. Rich folks get jittery when they think someone is coming, I said. I went back into the hallway and watched the house move around me. Servants passing with careful faces. Policemen murmuring into radios. Quayle hovering like a man afraid of his own client's furniture. And at the far end, Ezra Mott stood again, hands folded, eyes alive, watching. Not the study door now, watching Todd Mercer, who had arrived to hover and complain and act wounded. Ezra's gaze followed him like a shadow. I called Wolfe from the front room because the mansion's phones had the same feeling as its carpets. Too soft to trust. Wolfe, I said when he picked up. Study shows one glass, decanter clean, poker placed like a prop, window dusty, no exit there. Hallway is the only artery. Security logs show no intruders, but the service entrance alarm was tested at 2:30 yesterday, requested by Hank Red. That means someone made sure the staff would behave normally when it mattered. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Yes, the killer did not need to break in Archie. He needed the household to perform its routine. So the test is rehearsal, I said. Perhaps, Wolfe replied. Or misdirection. An alarm test draws attention to the door while the true mechanism is elsewhere. Door locked from inside, I reminded him. Wolfe's tone sharpened slightly. Do not worship that lock. Locks are devices, not deities. A lock can be managed if one has time and cooperation. I looked down the hall at Ezra Mott, silent, steady, watching Todd like a debt. Cooperation, I said. Or obedience. Precisely, Wolfe said. Observe the staff. A murderer in such a house does not smash. He orchestrates. I hung up and stood for a moment, listening to the mansion's soft, expensive silence. It felt less like a home now, and more like a theater after the curtain. Props still in place, actors still in costume, everyone waiting to see who gets blamed in the final scene. And the study door, solid oak, brass bolt, no marks, stood there like a joke only the killer understood. The door nobody used, or the door everybody used, because they didn't know they were being used. Chapter 5. When you've been around Nero Wolfe long enough, you learn that his most dangerous questions are the ones that sound like they belong at the grocery. He didn't begin with murder. He began with a nightcap. We had them back in the office by late afternoon. Page on the yellow chair, Todd on the red, Hank Red standing as if a chair might accuse him of something, Carla Wynne on the couch with her nurse's calm, Quayle trying to look invisible and failing, and Inspector Kramer hovering like a storm cloud that had found a ceiling. Ezra Mott stood by the door again, hands folded, silent as stone and twice as deliberate. Wolfe sat behind his desk, fingertips together, eyes half-lidded. He let the room settle into discomfort the way a chef lets a sauce reduce. Then he said conversationally, "Mr. Mott, what brand of whiskey did Mr. Mercer prefer for his nightcap?" It was harmless. It was almost silly. It was the kind of question you'd expect from a host trying to be polite. Kramer blinked. Page's brows lifted. Todd looked baffled. Hank Red's mouth tightened. Carla Wynne didn't move. Ezra Mott didn't move either. Wolfe waited. He didn't repeat himself. Wolfe doesn't repeat. Repetition suggests doubt. Ezra's eyes stayed on Wolfe. His mouth stayed closed. Wolfe nodded once, as if confirming a hypothesis. "Very well. Then I will ask a second harmless question." Kramer shifted, irritated. "For God's sake," Wolfe ignored him. "Mr. Mott, did Mr. Mercer keep the decanter on his desk, or did you bring it to him?" Ezra's face remained calm, but his eyes, just once, flicked sideways, not toward Page, not toward Todd, toward Hank Red. It was quick enough that a careless man could miss it, but Wolfe is not careless. Neither am I when my living depends on noticing what other people don't want noticed. Wolfe's gaze sharpened slightly, but his voice stayed mild. "Thank you," Hank Red snapped. "Thank you." He didn't answer. Wolfe looked at him. He did. Hank's jaw worked. "This is absurd. Ezra is old, he's confused. He probably doesn't even." Page's voice cut in sharp. "Don't you dare. Ezra has been more loyal to my father than anyone in that house. He knows every detail. He's not confused. He's refusing because he's protecting something," Todd muttered. "Or someone." Page's eyes flashed at him. "Don't start." Wolfe held up a hand for silence, and even Page obeyed because Wolfe can make silence feel like a commandment. "Miss Mercer," Wolfe said, "you insist Mr. Mott is loyal." "He is," Page said fiercely. "He practically raised me. He kept this family together." Wolfe nodded. "Mr. Red insists Mr. Mott is confused." Hank Red's voice was clipped. "He's 26 years in service. He's old. He's stubborn. He's used to control. He may be trying to create drama." Carla Wynne spoke quietly. "Ezra doesn't create drama. He prevents it." Todd gave a brittle laugh. "Unless he can't." Wolfe's eyes slid to Todd. "Mr. Todd Mercer, your contributions are not required at this moment." Todd's mouth shut. Wolfe returned his attention to Ezra. "Mr. Mott, you have refused to answer two harmless questions. That refusal is not, in itself, remarkable. Servants refuse all the time. Usually by hiding behind politeness, you are refusing openly. That is unusual." Ezra stood. Silent Wolfe continued. "You have also committed a small betrayal." Page stiffened. Number Wolfe did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Yes, not with speech, with your eyes." Hank Red's face reddened. "This is nonsense." Wolfe's gaze pinned him. "Mr. Red, your agitation is excessive for an innocent man." Hank's hands clenched and relaxed. "I'm agitated because this is a circus. My employer is dead. The police are trampling the house, and now you're reading glances like tea leaves." Wolfe's tone was dry. "Tea leaves can be more honest than accountants." Kramer barked. "Wolfe, if you've got something, spit it out." Wolfe's eyes flicked to him with faint contempt. "Inspector, do you imagine that truth emerges when you shout at it?" Kramer growled and subsided. Wolfe leaned back slightly and spoke as if addressing the room rather than any individual. "The study contained one glass, one decanter, a locked door, and poison in a nightcap. There was no forced entry. Therefore, the killer did not intrude. He operated within routine." He tapped his blotter once. "Routine is maintained by staff. Staff are governed by habits and hierarchy. If the staff behaved normally, it is because they were instructed, reassured, or compelled to behave normally." Page's voice trembled with anger. "Are you saying Ezra helped?" Wolfe's eyes met hers, and his expression softened only enough to be human. "I am saying Ezra Mott is protecting someone. Whether that protection constitutes help is not yet determined." Hank Red said quickly. He's protecting himself. He knows he'll be blamed. Wolfe looked at him as if Hank had offered a childish excuse. Number, if Mr. Mott were protecting himself, he would speak. He would create confusion. Silence invites suspicion. Mr. Mott is not a fool. Carla Wynne nodded faintly, as if agreeing reluctantly. Wolfe went on. The real betrayal is not that Mr. Mott will not speak. The betrayal is who he chooses to protect by staying quiet. Loyalty is not an abstract virtue, it is directed. Page swallowed. You think he's protecting Hank? Wolfe did not answer directly. He rarely does when the answer can ripen a little longer. Instead he said, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. Return to the house this evening, Wolfe instructed. Speak with Mrs. Vane and the cook. Determine who handled the decanter, who poured the drink, who had access to the servants' pantry. Inquire, casually, about the alarm test and who requested it. Pay particular attention to Mr. Red's movements between 2 and 3 yesterday afternoon. Hank Red's face tightened. This is harassment. Wolfe's eyes slid to him. It is investigation. Harassment is what you will experience if you continue to obstruct it. Kramer stood abruptly. I'm going to haul Red in. Wolfe's voice became ice. No, you are not. Kramer's eyes bulged. The hell I'm not. You will, Wolfe said. Do nothing until you have something that will hold in court. At present you have a vial in a pantry and a lock on a door. That is not enough. If you blunder now, the true culprit will escape. Kramer glared, then sat back down with a noise like a chair being punished. Wolfe turned his gaze back to Ezra Mott. Mr. Mott, your silence will not protect forever. It will only postpone. Ezra's eyes stayed steady, but for the first time, his folded hands shifted slightly, fingers tightening, then easing, as if he were gripping the edge of a decision, and Hank Red, for all his careful posture, could not stop his eyes from darting once toward the office door, as if considering how quickly he could reach it. Wolfe saw that too. He looked at me. Go, Archie. I stood, already tired, and thought as I headed for the hall, in a house like Mercer's, a servant's loyalty is a currency. Ezra Mott was spending his in silence. The question was, who was he buying time for? Chapter 6. Wolfe's idea of kindness is not the soft kind that pats you on the head. It is the hard kind that removes your excuses. He didn't send me uptown again that evening. He didn't order Saul Panzer to stand in a doorway like a lock. He didn't even growl at Kramer, though I could see the impulse flicker now and then, like a match that never quite catches. Instead, he changed the room, and when Nero Wolfe changes the room, it's because he intends to change the people inside it. By 7 o'clock, the brownstone was doing something it rarely does, hosting strangers in the front room, not the office. The front room, Wolfe's territory. Yes, but not the courtroom with the big desk and the red chair. The front room is where civilized people drink and talk, and pretend the world isn't trying to murder them. Fritz had arranged chairs the way he arranges everything, with quiet authority and a faint expression that said he did not approve of bringing mess into the house. The fire was lit, the lamps glowed, the air smelled of coffee and good wood and Wolfe's orchids upstairs, as if to remind everyone that refinement existed and they were not worthy of it. I stood by the table with a pad, because I'm the only clerk Wolfe trusts, and because my job in these little social experiments is to look harmless while noticing everything. They arrived in a cluster, as Wolfe had directed, Quayle shepherding them like a man trying to keep expensive cats from clawing each other. Paige Mercer came first, wrapped in a dark coat and indignation. Todd Mercer followed, too loud in his entrance, as if volume could replace substance. Carla Wynne came quietly, taking in the room with the calm eyes of someone who has watched panic fail. Hank Red arrived last, and he brought with him the faint odor of being late on purpose. Ezra Mott entered with them. He did not look around. He did not react to the warmth, the fire, Fritz's polite greeting. He stood near the doorway as if he had been assigned there by fate and would not abandon his post. Wolfe did not come down immediately. That was intentional. When Wolfe keeps people waiting, he is letting their nerves heat up to the point where they become useful. Kramer arrived too, of course. He came in with 2 plainclothes-men and the expression of a man invited to dinner who suspects the meal is a trick. He took one look at the front room and snorted. "This is cute," he growled at me, Wolfe throwing a party. "He calls it civility," I said. "You call it noise prevention." Kramer grunted and planted himself in a chair with the stubbornness of a bulldog. When Wolfe finally entered, he did it the way he enters any room, slowly, heavily, with the certainty that the room was improved by his presence. He wore his black suit like a uniform of superiority. He looked at them as a group and said, "Sit." They sat, except Ezra Mott. Even Hank read, though he did it reluctantly, as if chairs were traps. Ezra Mott did not sit. Wolfe did not command him again. That, too, was kindness, allowing Ezra his chosen shape. Wolfe took the one chair Fritz had placed for him, slightly apart, as if the furniture itself understood hierarchy. He folded his hands over his stomach and regarded them like a judge who has decided the law is simple and only the liars are complicated. "Miss Mercer," Wolfe said. "Mr. Todd Mercer, Miss Wynne, Mr. Red, Mr. Quayle, Inspector Kramer. You are here because I have determined that this case can be resolved without further delay if the truth is offered voluntarily." Todd's mouth opened to speak. Wolfe's eyes moved to him, and Todd's mouth closed again. Wolfe continued, "Cal Mercer is dead. The police will conclude, absent contradiction, that he died by accidental overdose." Page sat up straight. "Accidental. He was poisoned." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "We're not calling it accidental, Wolfe." Wolfe's gaze flicked to him. "Inspector, you will if you cannot prove otherwise." Kramer's face reddened. "We've got cyanide." "Suspicion," Wolfe corrected, "is not proof. You have a vial in a servant's pantry, a locked door, and a household that offers tidy truths. Unless one of you chooses to correct the record, the simplest narrative will prevail." "Mr. Wolfe, you cannot seriously." "I can," Wolfe said. "I will, and I will hand Inspector Kramer my conclusions as accidental overdose, along with a recommendation that he close his file and go home." Kramer gave a harsh laugh. "You think I'd—" Wolfe ignored him. "This is not a threat. It is an inducement." Carla Wynn's eyes sharpened. "An inducement for what?" "For honesty," Wolfe replied. "Accidents do not bring consequences of the kind you fear. Murder does. If one of you knows the truth and prefers not to see the consequences, this is your opportunity to prevent them." Todd made a brittle sound. "This is insane. You're trying to blackmail us into confessing." Wolfe's voice stayed calm. "Number, I am offering you a choice. Allow the false record to stand or correct it. Those are the only options available to decent people." Page's hands clenched. "My father was not an accident." Wolfe looked at her. "Your father, Miss Mercer, may have been a suicide, or a murderer's victim, or a foolish man who took something he should not have taken. We do not know, because the one man who observed the decisive moment has chosen silence." He turned his head slightly toward Ezra Mott. "Mr. Mott," Wolfe said softly, "I will ask you one more question. If you answer it, no one here will be harmed by my words." Everyone's eyes went to Ezra. Ezra's face did not change, but the air around him tightened, as if he had become the axis of the room. Wolfe asked, gently, "Did Cal Mercer pour his own nightcap?" Ezra Mott did not speak. Wolfe waited, long enough for Todd to shift, for Hank Red's jaw to work, for Page to look as if she might leap out of her chair and shake words loose by force. Ezra remained silent. Wolfe nodded, as if he had expected nothing else. "Very well. Then, with the same mildness," he said, "in that case, I will name the person whose testimony would be most useful to the police." Hank Red's head lifted a fraction. Page's eyes narrowed. Todd leaned forward as if drawn by gravity. Wolfe's gaze moved across them, and then he said, deliberately, "Mrs. Delavane." It wasn't a dramatic name. It wasn't even a glamorous one. It was the housekeeper, but Ezra Mott. Silent, controlled Ezra, shifted, not much. Just a small adjustment of his stance, a subtle bracing of his shoulders, as if he had heard a blow coming and was preparing to absorb it. I saw it. Wolfe saw it. Carla Wynne saw it too. Her eyes flicked to Ezra and then back to Wolfe, registering the shift like a nurse registering a pulse. Hank Red did not see it, or pretended not to. He spoke quickly. "Mrs. Vane. That's ridiculous. She's a housekeeper." Wolfe's eyes remained on Ezra for a beat, then returned to Hank. "Housekeepers control access. They direct staff. They know where things are stored, and they often believe they are invisible." Paige's voice was sharp. "Are you accusing her?" Wolfe's tone stayed maddeningly calm. "I am accusing no one, yet. I am observing reactions." "Mr. Mott reacted to that name," Todd snapped. "He reacts to everything. He hates all of us." Ezra's eyes moved. Then, just once, to Todd, the look wasn't hatred. It was memory. "The kind of memory that has weight," Wolfe said. "Mr. Todd Mercer, you are mistaken. Mr. Mott does not hate indiscriminately. He is selective. That is why his silence is valuable." Kramer leaned forward, impatient. "Wolfe, cut it. You're telling me it's an accident unless somebody squeals. That's not procedure." Wolfe's gaze flicked to him. "Procedure, Inspector, is what you do when you do not know what you are doing. I am providing a lever." Kramer's mouth opened. Wolfe continued. "I do not intend to release this case as accidental overdose," Wolfe said. "I intend to solve it, but I am offering the guilty party something they may want, a lesser outcome. If they reject it, it tells me they are either confident or desperate." Hank Red's voice came tight. "This is manipulation." Wolfe nodded once. "Yes." He looked at Paige. "Miss Mercer, you are angry." Paige's eyes flashed. "Because my father is dead, and you're treating it like a parlor game." Wolfe's voice softened, just slightly. "Because you loved him enough to be angry. That is not irrelevant. Emotion often reveals facts." He turned to Carla Wynne. "Miss Wynne, you gave Mr. Mercer a sedative." "Yes," she said steadily, "as ordered." "Did you witness him drink his nightcap?" Carla hesitated a fraction. "Number I left after administering the pill." Wolfe nodded. "So the decisive act occurred after you departed." He looked at Hank Red. "Mr. Red, you requested an alarm test." Hank's chin lifted. "For security, for routine," Wolfe corrected, "to reassure staff, to ensure everyone behaved normally." Hank's voice sharpened. "That's speculation." Wolfe smiled faintly. It was not a pleasant smile. "It is inference. You will find it uncomfortable, Mr. Red, because it will be accurate." Todd blurted, "This is insane. Why are we here, if you're going to call it an accident?" Wolfe's eyes pinned him. "Because someone here is lying to himself. That is the easiest lie to exploit." Ezra Mott stood, hands folded, mouth closed. Wolfe watched him for a long moment, then spoke softly, almost kindly. "Mr. Mott," he said, "you believe your silence protects someone. It may, but it also protects the murderer." Ezra's eyes did not move. Wolfe continued, "If you allow the record to be accidental overdose, you will permit the guilty to walk freely and the innocent to be suspected forever. That is not loyalty, that is surrender." Ezra's fingers tightened together at his waist. Then, slowly, they loosened. He still did not speak, but he turned his head, just a fraction, toward Paige, Mercer, not toward Todd, not toward Hank. Toward Paige, it was the smallest motion in the world, and it told Wolfe something important. Ezra's silence wasn't built to protect the estate manager or the nephew. It was built around the daughter. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, satisfied in a grim way. He said, "Good, we have begun." Then he looked at me. "Archie, tomorrow morning, you will bring Mrs. Vane and Mrs. Innes to my office. If they refuse, you will persuade them gently." I stood. "Yes, sir." Wolfe's gaze returned to the group. "And you will all remain in New York, if anyone attempts to depart. Inspector Kramer will have my permission to behave like a barbarian." Kramer snorted. "That's generous." Wolfe dismissed them with a wave so small it was insulting. As Fritz escorted them out, Paige paused near Ezra Mott. She looked up at him, searching his face for words. Ezra gave her none, but he stood a little closer to her than he had before. Kindness, Wolfe had called it. A lever. I watched Ezra's shift and thought. Someone had just been named, and Ezra had braced for impact. Now the question wasn't whether Ezra knew. It was what would happen when the truth finally hit. Chapter 7. Wolfe has a fondness for simplicity, the way some men have a fondness for fireworks. He enjoys it most when other people don't realize how dangerous it is. By late morning, the next day, our front room looked less like a parlor and more like a stage set. Fritz had cleared the central table and polished it as if it were about to host a governor, not a murderer. Wolfe had insisted on that. He says, cleanliness is not morality, but it is the proper background for it. On the table Wolfe placed a decanter, our own, not Mercer's, but cut glass enough to satisfy the eye, 4 identical tumblers, and a small bottle that stood in for the night sedative. Beside the bottle was a saucer with a single sugar cube, because Wolfe likes to make points with props. Kramer arrived early, pretending he hadn't. He sat in the corner with his notebook and his impatience and watched Wolfe's furniture, the way a dog watches a bone behind a fence. The cast assembled again: Paige Mercer, pale and stiff; Todd Mercer, restless and defensive; Carla Wynne, calm but wary; Hank Red, smooth and tight; Quayle, anxious; and Ezra Mott, silent as ever, posted by the doorway as if that was where a man went to guard his soul. Wolfe entered last, because the director always does. He took his chair, not behind his desk, but in the front room's main chair, angled toward the table, so he could see faces without the desk between. It made the room feel less official, and therefore more dangerous. People lie more easily in a formal setting. In a living room they feel exposed. Wolfe regarded them and said, "This will not be an interrogation. It will be a clarification. You have all told us where you were last night. Now you will stand where you claim you stood, and you will do it based on your own truthful statements." Todd muttered, "This is a circus." Wolfe's eyes slid to him. "You may leave, Mr. Todd Mercer, if you wish. Inspector Kramer will detain you immediately, and I will recommend he do so with vigor." Todd shut up. Wolfe gestured at the table. "Here is the nightcap. Here is the decanter. Here are glasses. The study had 1 glass on the desk. We have 4 because there are 4 of you whose presence in the house matters." Paige's voice sharpened. "My presence doesn't." Wolfe lifted a hand. "Your presence matters because you are his daughter, and because someone believes it does. Sit, if you prefer, but you will not interrupt." Paige sat, lips pressed tight. Wolfe turned to Carla Wynne. "Miss Wynne, you administered the sedative at approximately 8:45. "Yes," Carla said. "Stand," Wolfe instructed, "where you stood when you gave it to him." Carla rose and moved to a spot near the table, slightly to the right, as if indicating the edge of a sitting room. She did it without fuss. Nurses are good at being exact. Wolfe nodded. "Mr. Todd Mercer, you say you were in the dining room, finishing coffee with Mrs. Vane." Todd stood and moved to the far side of the room, near the doorway that led toward the hall, as if he wanted to keep a path open. He tried to smile. It didn't work. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Hank Red. "Mr. Red, you say you were completing a phone call in the downstairs office at 8:50. Hank's jaw tightened. "Yes, stand," Wolfe said. Hank walked to a spot nearer the table than Todd, but farther than Carla, as if claiming a respectable distance from any murder. He kept his hands at his sides and his face neutral, which is what men do when they think neutrality is armor. Wolfe looked at Paige. "Miss Mercer, you were not in the house." "I was not," Paige said coldly. "Then remain seated," Wolfe replied, "but you will watch." Wolfe did not ask him to stand anywhere else. That was the trick. Wolfe never demands from a man what he knows the man will refuse. He arranges the room so refusal becomes visible. Wolfe picked up one of the tumblers and set it directly in front of the decanter. "Now," he said, "we will recreate the simplest act in the world. A man pours a drink." He looked at Hank Red. "Mr. Red, you have spoken repeatedly of routine. You have argued that staff are old, confused, and prone to drama. You have presented yourself as the only adult in a childish household. Therefore, I will ask you to perform the adult act." Hank's eyes flashed. "I'm not poor," Wolfe said. Kramer leaned forward, eager now because this felt like action, and Kramer loves action the way Wolfe loves thought. Hank's mouth tightened. He took a step toward the table. It was a small step, 2 feet, but it was the first time he had moved toward the decanter since this began, and the room tightened as if the air had been drawn through a fist. Ezra Mott's eyes fixed on Hank. Hank reached out, and Ezra moved, not quickly, not dramatically, quietly. One smooth step forward, and his hand came out from his folded position for the first time since he'd entered the brownstone. He did not touch Hank. He did not speak. He moved the glass. He slid it away from the decanter by 4 inches, placing it to the side as if to prevent it from being filled. Then he withdrew his hand and returned it to his folded posture. Silent again, still again. But the room had changed. Todd sucked in a breath. Paige's head snapped toward Ezra, eyes wide. Carla Wynn's expression tightened for the first time, surprise breaking her nurse's calm. Hank Red froze with his hand suspended over the table, his face flushing. Kramer half rose. "What the—" Wolfe's voice cut through, low and satisfied. "Thank you, Mr. Mott." Hank jerked his hand back as if the decanter had bitten him. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "He's senile. He's interfering." "Yes," Wolfe said quietly. "He is interfering." He leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mott has refused to answer questions. That could be fear, loyalty, or stubbornness. But silence that interferes is not empty. It is a statement." Todd blurted. "He doesn't like Hank. Everybody knows Ezra and Hank hate each other." Wolfe's eyes flicked to Todd. "Do not explain what you do not understand." He looked back at Hank Red. "Mr. Red, you may step back." Hank stepped back. Jaw clenched, eyes furious. Wolfe's gaze moved to Ezra again. "Mr. Mott, you have now spoken without words. You have demonstrated that you do not want Mr. Red near the decanter." Ezra's face stayed composed. His eyes did not waver. They held on Wolfe now, not pleading, not defiant, simply present. Wolfe's tone remained mild, but the mildness was edged. "Therefore, your silence has a target." Kramer growled. "Wolfe, are you saying Red poisoned him?" Wolfe did not answer directly. "I am saying Ezra Mott believes Mr. Red's hand on a decanter is dangerous." Hank Red's voice rose. "This is insane. You're convicting me based on a servant moving a glass." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Number, I am selecting the correct direction." He turned his head slightly toward Carla Wynn. "Miss Wynn, you did not witness Mr. Mercer drink his nightcap?" "No," Carla said, voice tight now. "You administered a sedative," Wolfe said. "Who had access to your medications?" Carla hesitated. "I kept them in my bag in my room." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "And who entered your room freely?" Carla's eyes flicked toward the hall, toward the servants. "Toward routine," she said slowly. "Mrs. Vane, Ezra, sometimes Mr. Red if he needed me." Hank snapped. "I never." Wolfe raised a hand. "Silence, Mr. Red. You have had enough speech for one morning." He looked at me. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Go to the Mercer house," Wolfe instructed. "Retrieve Miss Wynn's medication bag. Retrieve the nightcap glass, if it still exists. Retrieve the decanter, if the police have not already seized it. And most importantly, determine who handled the sedative bottle last night, besides Miss Wynn." Kramer barked. "Evidence goes through the police." Wolfe's eyes slid to him. "Inspector, if you had already secured it properly, I would not need to send my assistant." Kramer sputtered. Quayle looked faint. Wolfe turned his gaze back to the room. "You see," he said, calm as a man describing weather. "How easy it is to speak without words. Mr. Mott has done so. Now the rest of you will find that your tidy truths are insufficient." Ezra Mott stood silent. But he had moved a glass hand in Nero Wolfe's world. That was testimony. Chapter 8. If Hank Red had been born without a conscience, he had at least been born with an instinct for paperwork. He arrived that afternoon with the same well-cut suit and the same well-cut answers, and he wore them the way a man wears armor that has been polished by practice. He did not bluster like Todd. He did not bristle like Paige. He did not quiet down like Carla. He came prepared enough that Wolfe's eyes narrowed the instant Hank opened his mouth. Because a rehearsed truth has seams. Wolfe had moved back to the office. He prefers the desk when he intends to make a man feel small. The red chair waited. The yellow chair waited. Kramer sat in the corner, sulking and listening, which was the best I could hope for from him. Hank Red sat in the red chair, as if he owned it. That alone made him a suspect in Wolfe's mind. Wolfe does not forgive presumption in his furniture, Wolfe said. "Mr. Red, state your movements after dinner on the night Mr. Mercer died." Hank did it smoothly. "At 8:30, I concluded, my conversation with Mr. Mercer. I went downstairs to the office near the kitchen to complete a phone call with a contractor. I left the premises at 8:50. I did not enter the study. I did not see Mr. Mercer after he retired." Wolfe's eyes remained half-lidded. "You did not enter the study. Number, you did not handle his drink." Hank's gaze held steady. "Number, you did not administer medication." "Number, you only," Wolfe said. "Checked the hall and secured the house." Hank nodded. "Yes." Wolfe leaned back slightly. "I agree." Hank blinked. That was not the reaction he'd expected. Men like Hank expect accusation. Agreement throws them off balance, because they have prepared for battle, not for applause. Kramer grunted. "You agree, you just—" Wolfe lifted a hand. "Inspector, restrain yourself. Agreement is not exoneration." He turned his eyes back to Hank. "Your statements are true." Hank's jaw tightened. "Then why am I here?" "Because your truth," Wolfe said mildly, "is too careful." Hank's eyes narrowed. "Careful is good." "Careful," Wolfe replied, "is suspicious." I watched Hank's hands. They were still, but the fingertips pressed lightly into each other. Pressure without movement. He was holding himself in place. Wolfe continued. "You have repeated 3 times what you did not do. You did not enter the study. You did not handle the drink. You did not administer medication. That is not how innocent men speak. Innocent men speak of what they did." Hank's voice stayed smooth. "I told you what I did. I checked the hall. I secured the house." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Yes, verbs without content. Checked. Secured. These are words that describe motion without revealing action. They are shaped to avoid one verb." Hank's mouth tightened. "What verb?" Wolfe's voice was dry. "Served." The word landed quietly, but it landed hard. Even Kramer stopped shifting. Hank said, "That's absurd." Wolfe's gaze held him. "Is it? In a house with servants, the act of serving is common. It is performed constantly. It is also the act that would place poison into a man's hand without requiring one to enter his study." Hank's eyes flashed. "I am not a servant." "No," Wolfe agreed. "You are a manager. You direct servants. You instruct. You arrange. That is why your truth is perfect. It is built to be perfect. It avoids the one verb that would connect you to the drink, served." Hank's voice tightened a fraction. "I never poured Mercer a drink." Wolfe nodded. "You never entered the study. I accept that." "You never poured a drink at the desk. I accept that as well." Kramer burst. "Then what the hell?" Wolfe ignored him. "Mr. Red, did you ever instruct Ezra Mott to take a tray to Mr. Mercer, to bring him his nightcap?" Hank's eyes narrowed, and for the first time his smoothness cracked, not into anger but into calculation. "I don't recall." Wolfe's mouth tightened. An estate manager recalls everything that protects him. Hank's gaze slid briefly toward me, as if searching for a weaker opponent. I gave him my best cheerful look, the kind that says I'm enjoying this. Wolfe turned his head slightly. Miss Wynne. Carla Wynne entered, calm but taut, and sat on the yellow chair. Wolfe asked her the same question in 3 forms, because Wolfe enjoys triangulation. Did you handle Mr. Mercer's medication? Yes, she said. I administered it. Did you handle his nightcap? Numbered. Did you see the nightcap prepared? Carla hesitated. Number that was typically Ezra, if Mr. Mercer requested it. Sometimes Mrs. Vane. Wolfe nodded, filing it away. Was your medication bag ever out of your possession? Carla's mouth tightened, for brief periods in my room. Who had access? Carla's eyes flicked, unwilling, toward the door, toward servants, toward routine. Ezra, Mrs. Vane, Mr. Red could. If he wanted, he had keys. Hank's jaw clenched. That's... Wolfe lifted a finger. Hank stopped. Then Wolfe had Todd Mercer dragged back in, figuratively. Todd arrived with his usual brittle energy and sat in the red chair with the expression of a man being forced to attend his own bad review. You argued with your uncle, Wolfe said. Todd's face reddened. Yes, about money, about the estate. He was stubborn. And then you left early. I left, Todd insisted. Around 9. Did you go to the study? No. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Did you see Ezra Mott in the hall? Todd hesitated. Yes. What did he do? Todd swallowed. Nothing. He just stood there, like always. Wolfe nodded, and his gaze flicked briefly to me. The look meant, note his phrasing. Wolfe dismissed Todd with a flick of his fingers and sat back. Now, Wolfe said, we have a pattern of careful truths. Miss Wynne handled medication, not drink. Mr. Todd argues, then leaves. Mr. Red checks and secures without serving. Mr. Mott refuses to speak. Mrs. Vane manages a household and believes herself invisible. Kramer growled. We already know that. Wolfe's eyes slid to him. Inspector, you know nothing. You possess facts, but not their arrangement. He turned slightly toward me. Archie, report the status of the physical evidence. I said. The study window latch is dusty. No exit there. The decanter and glass are in police custody. The vial from the pantry is being tested. The service entrance alarm test was logged at 2:30 the day Mercer died, requested by Hank Red according to the security guard. Hank's face went rigid. That's routine. Wolfe's voice was mild. Yes, routine. Exactly. He leaned forward slightly, and the room quieted because Wolfe's bulk has gravity. The poison, Wolfe said, was placed by someone who could touch the drink without entering the study. Hank Red's eyes narrowed. That's impossible. Wolfe's gaze held him. No, Mr. Red. It is merely inconvenient for you. Page, sitting stiffly near the door, said sharply, who could do that? Wolfe's eyes moved to her. A servant could carry a tray to the study door. A servant could place the glass on a side table inside if summoned. A servant could hand the drink directly to Mr. Mercer at the threshold. Kramer barked. But the door was locked. Wolfe's tone was cutting. After the act, not before it. He continued. If Mr. Mercer was already seated, already expecting his nightcap, he could accept it, close the door, lock it, and drink. The person who delivered it need never enter. They need only touch the glass, or arrange for someone else to touch it. Carla Wynne's eyes narrowed. But why would Ezra? Wolfe held up a hand. You assume Ezra is the agent. I do not. He glanced toward the door where Ezra Mott stood silent. Ezra's face was still, but his eyes just once shifted toward Page Mercer. Wolfe noticed, so did I. Wolfe sat back, satisfied in a grim way. Therefore, he said, the question is not who entered the study. The question is who could command access to the glass, and who could do so while keeping the household behaving normally. His gaze moved, slow and heavy, to Hank Red. Because, Wolfe added softly, Control is the true weapon in a house like Mercer's. Hank Red held Wolfe's stare. His truth was perfect. And Wolfe had just shown us the shape of the lie hiding inside it. Chapter 9, if you want to understand how a rich man dies without anyone entering the room. You don't start with poison, you start with furniture. That's what I did, back at Mercer's mansion with Quayle in my wake, like a legal shadow and Kramer behind us like a grudge in an overcoat. The house had the same careful hush as before, but now it was a little less sure of itself. People had been questioned in Wolfe's front room, and nothing makes a household more nervous than realizing the walls are not the only things that can listen. Mrs. Delavane met us in the hall, posture rigid, lips thin. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, as if it were a diagnosis. "Must you keep returning?" "I keep returning because your employer stopped living," I told her. "It's a bad habit I'd like to correct." Kramer pushed past her. "We're here to look at that hallway again." Mrs. Vane's eyes tightened. "You've looked at everything." "Not everything," I said. "Not the route." Quayle blinked. "Route. The way service moves," I said. "In a house like this, nothing is random. Not even coffee, especially not coffee." I headed toward the study, and this time I didn't go in. The study itself had become a shrine for policemen. Tape, gloves, the faint smell of disinfectant and authority. I stayed in the hall just outside it, where Ezra Mott had stood like a post, and where the killer had depended on habit doing what habit always does. There was a small table there, half-moon polished, against the wall, the kind of table you don't notice until you need somewhere to put a tray. Yesterday it had been empty. Today it was empty too, but the emptiness felt staged. I pointed at it. "What sits here?" I asked Mrs. Vane. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Try again," I said. "What sits here when the house is being normal?" Her nostrils flared. "A vase sometimes." "Not last night," I said. "Last night it was used." Kramer stepped closer, squinting as if tables might confess if stared at hard enough. "How do you know?" I leaned down and ran my fingertip lightly along the edge of the tabletop, not touching anything important. Just dust. There was a faint oval where something had been placed and then removed, the way a glass leaves a ring on a polite surface. "Because someone put a glass here," I said. "Not for long. Just long enough for a man inside the study to open his door, take it, close the door, and lock it behind him." Quayle frowned, but the housekeeper said. "I know what she said," I replied. "Everybody in that house says things. The furniture tells the truth because it doesn't care who inherits." Mrs. Vane's face tightened. "You are implying—" "I'm implying a habit." I cut in. Cal Mercer liked control. He also liked privacy. He didn't want servants in his study, so he did what rich men do when they want service and secrecy at the same time. He arranged it. Kramer grunted. "Meaning?" "Meaning the nightcap doesn't get carried into the study," I said. "It gets brought to the hall table, left there, and Mercer fetches it himself." Quayle's eyes widened slightly. "That is possible." "It's more than possible," I said. "It's neat. It's exactly Mercer." I looked at Mrs. Vane, who carried the nightcap tray last night. Her jaw worked. "Ezra," Kramer barked. "Then why won't he say it?" Mrs. Vane's eyes went cold. "Because Ezra has dignity." "Dignity," I said. "Or leverage." Mrs. Vane stiffened. That was a reaction worth keeping. I turned away before she could decide to faint from insult and walked toward the side corridor that led to the servants' pantry and kitchen. If the hall table was the drop point, then the route mattered. The path a tray would take to reach that table without looking strange. And if you want to hide murder in a household, you hide it in what nobody questions: service. The corridor was wide enough for two people to pass without touching. Soft rugs muffled footsteps. A door halfway down opened into the dining room. Another led to the pantry at the far end, was the kitchen entrance, where the real work lived. I stopped and looked at the arrangement the way Wolfe looks at a chessboard. If you brought a tray from the kitchen, the shortest path to the study door went right past the downstairs office, Hank Red's office, and right past the security panel. I could hear Wolfe in my head. Routine is governed by hierarchy. I said quietly. Mrs. Vane. Who decides which staff uses which corridor at which time? She hesitated, just a fraction too long. I do, Kramer snorted. Sure. And Mr. Red, she added quickly, like a correction made under pressure. He oversees the whole operation. Oversees, I echoed. A nice word, like checks and secures. Quayle spoke up, careful. Mr. Goodwin, do you believe Mr. Red? I believe he could, I said. Whether he did is what we're about to make the house answer. I pushed into the kitchen. It was the kind of kitchen that looks like a restaurant's backstage. Stainless steel labeled drawers. Everything arranged to keep human error from embarrassing money. Mrs. Innes, the cook, stood at the counter with her arms folded, eyes sharp. She didn't like me. Cooks don't like detectives. Detectives ask questions when cooks prefer pots to people. What now? She said. Last night, I said, nightcap. Who poured it? She snorted. I don't pour whiskey for gentlemen. Ezra did that when Mr. Mercer asked. And when he didn't ask, I said. She gave me a look. He always asked. Not to your face, I said. To Ezra, to the housekeeper, to whoever the house listens to. Mrs. Innes's lips tightened. Ezra brought the tray. That's all. Kramer leaned in. Did you see him pour it? No, she snapped. I saw him with the tray. I didn't see what was on it. Did anyone else handle the tray? I asked. Mrs. Innes's eyes flicked toward the pantry door. Mrs. Vane sometimes checked it. She's fussy. Mrs. Vane stiffened behind me. I check everything. Except murder, Kramer growled. Mrs. Vane's face went pale with rage. I raised a hand. Let's keep it civilized. Mrs. Innes, where does Ezra keep the decanter when it's used? In the study, she said. Or in the sideboard in the dining room, depending. Last night, I asked. She hesitated. Dining room, Mr. Red said so. That landed like a coin on a table. Quayle blinked. Mr. Red instructed where the decanter should be stored. Mrs. Innes shrugged defensively. He runs the house, he said. Mr. Mercer wanted it on the sideboard for after dinner. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Did Mercer say that? Mrs. Innes's mouth tightened. I didn't hear Mercer say it. I heard Mr. Red say it. Red say it. I nodded slowly. So the decanter was moved from its usual place into a more public place, where more hands could touch it without anyone thinking it strange. Mrs. Vane snapped. That's normal. Sometimes, Mr. Mercer. Sometimes, I said. Somebody says Mr. Mercer wants. And the staff obeys because obeying is what keeps your job. Mrs. Vane's face hardened. You're accusing us of being fools. No, I said. I'm accusing someone of counting on you not to be fools, just to be normal. That's when I saw it. The service route wasn't just a corridor. It was a mechanism. A tray leaves the kitchen. It passes the downstairs office. It passes security. It reaches the hall table outside the study. It waits. Mercer opens the study door, takes the glass, locks himself in, drinks. The person who poisoned the drink never has to enter the study. He only has to arrange for the poisoned glass to be the one that lands on the hall table. And the person who could arrange routes, decanters, and harmless commotion was not the cook, not the nurse, not the nephew with a loud mouth. It was the man who oversees. I turned to Kramer. Show me the alarm log again. He bristled. I already. Humor me, I said. It's one of my few charms. He led us back to the security panel, where the bored guard looked like he'd rather be guarding a parked car. Kramer slapped the log sheet on the desk. There it was again, service entrance alarm test. Passed. I tapped it. Who authorized the test? The guard shrugged. Mr. Red. He said Mr. Mercer wanted a full check. And what does a test do? I asked. The guard blinked. It sets off a chime. We have to reset the panel. It takes a couple minutes. A couple minutes, I repeated, during which people move around, doors open, staff glance toward the noise, and a man carrying a tray becomes invisible because everyone assumes the fuss is about the alarm. Kramer's face tightened. You think he used the test as cover? I think he used it as rehearsal. I said. He tested the staff's reaction. He confirmed the corridor could be busy, and no one would remember who passed. Quayle swallowed. Mr. Red is meticulous. Meticulous, I said. That's another word for careful. Mrs. Vane's voice was tight. This is speculation. It's structure, I corrected. And murder needs structure in a house like this. We went back to the hall outside the study. I stood by the little half-moon table again and pictured the sequence. It wasn't dramatic. That was the point. It was ordinary enough to kill a man. I asked quietly, Mrs. Vane, did Mr. Mercer have a habit of taking his nightcap from this table himself? Her mouth tightened. Sometimes. How often is sometimes? I pressed. She stiffened. Often. And who suggested it? I asked. Her eyes flicked away. It was private. Mr. Mercer didn't like servants in his study, I finished. So he trained the household to leave the tray here, and the killer used that habit. Kramer growled, so Ezra left it here poisoned. Mrs. Vane snapped. Ezra would never. I held up a hand. Not so fast. Ezra left it here. That's likely, but Ezra didn't have to poison it. Ezra only had to obey a routine and keep his mouth shut afterward. Quayle's face tightened. Why would he? He was watching Paige now, not Todd, watching her with the quiet guardianship of a man who has carried a family's secrets long enough to forget they aren't his. Because Ezra is loyal, I said softly. Not to Cal Mercer. Not anymore. Quayle blinked. To whom? To Paige. I said. He's protecting her inheritance from scandal. Kramer snorted. Inheritance, scandal, murder is scandal. Not if it's called an accident, I said. Not if the record says Cal Mercer chose his own end. Not if the family can bury it with dignity and money. Ezra's one sentence to the police. The master chose his own end. Wasn't poetry. It was a shield. It makes the death look like something Mercer decided, not something that opens the estate to a circus. Quayle's face went pale. That could matter if there's murder. There are contests, claims, litigation. Exactly, I said. Ezra's silence protects Paige from the kind of fight that tears a name apart, but it also protects the man who arranged the fight in the first place. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Hank read. I nodded. Hank controls staff routes. Hank instructs where decanters go. Hank logs alarm tests that create harmless commotion and cover. Hank speaks in perfect truths shaped to avoid served. Hank never had to enter the study. He only had to make sure the right glass reached this table. Quayle swallowed hard. But why would he kill Mercer? Money, Kramer growled. Control, I said. A manager doesn't just manage. He often believes he deserves the thing he manages. Kramer took a step toward the hall as if he might march out and clap handcuffs on Hank right then. Hold it, I said. Wolfe wants something that holds in court. If we grab him now, we get a tantrum and a lawyer and a lot of noise. Quayle looked at me sharply. I am a lawyer. I mean a different kind, I said. The kind that bills by the scream. Kramer glared. Then what? Then we take it to Wolfe, I said. Because Ezra's silence only makes sense if Wolfe makes silence impossible. Back at the brownstone. Wolfe listened without blinking as I reported the route. The hall table, the sideboard decanter instruction, the alarm test as cover, and the shape of Ezra's loyalty. When I finished, Wolfe's eyes narrowed in a way I like to see, satisfied, but not pleased. Good, he said. Now we have mechanism. Kramer, who had followed us in, barked. So we grab Red. Wolfe's gaze slid to him. Number. Kramer's face went red. The hell you mean no? Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Inspector, if we seize Mr. Red now, we will obtain denials and attorneys. We will not obtain the one thing that will resolve this. What? Kramer snapped. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward the stairs, toward the plant rooms, toward the calm, higher part of the house. A confession, he said. Or failing that, an admission that constitutes proof. Quayle's voice was tight. How will you force that? Wolfe looked at me. I will not force it. I will make scandal inevitable. I blinked, meaning. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Ezra Mott is protecting Miss Mercer from scandal. Therefore, we will create a scandal greater than he can tolerate, unless he corrects the record. Kramer stared. You're going to threaten the daughter? Wolfe's gaze sharpened. I am going to threaten the lie. He turned to me. Archie, summon them, all of them. Tonight, in my office, not the front room, the office. I will have my final gathering. My stomach gave a small pleased jump. Wolfe's final gatherings are like opera. The singing is mostly pain, but the ending is always clean, Wolfe added. And bring Ezra Mott. I hesitated. He won't speak. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He will, he must. He has already testified with his eyes and his hands. Tonight he will testify with words, because if he does not, I will give Inspector Kramer accidental overdose in public and permit every newspaper in New York to print the daughter's name beside it. Quayle's face went tight with alarm. Wolfe's tone remained mild. Mr. Quayle, you understand scandal. You trade in it. Inform Miss Mercer that she is invited. He leaned back slightly, the decision complete. The killer relied on staff behaving normally tonight. In my office, no one will be permitted to behave normally, Kramer grunted. Half angry, half eager. I went to the phone to start pulling strings, and as my finger hovered over the dial, I looked at Wolfe and thought, Ezra Mott has been trying to protect Paige Mercer's inheritance by keeping a clean story. Wolfe was about to make the story so dirty that the only way to clean it would be the truth. And somebody Hank read, with his perfect truths, was about to find out what happens when Nero Wolfe stops being kind. Chapter 10. Wolfe's office was ready the way it always is when he intends to end something orderly, warm, and implacable. The desk blotter lay square. The chairs were placed with deliberate cruelty. The red chair for the man who would sweat, the yellow for the one who would pretend calm, the couch for those who would try to hide in comfort. Fritz had brought in beer and sandwiches, because Wolfe likes his climaxes accompanied by provisions. He says hunger makes liars sloppy. Kramer arrived with 2 men and a look that tried to be professional and kept slipping into anticipation. Quayle came with a folder pressed to his chest, as if papers could shield him from scandal. Paige Mercer entered with her chin high and her eyes bright, anger, grief, fear, all pressed into one elegant posture. Todd Mercer trailed behind her, trying to look innocent and looking only young. Carla Wynne sat quietly, hands folded, watching Wolfe, as if he were an instrument. She didn't fully trust. Hank Red arrived last. He walked in as if punctuality were a favor. He grunted. He nodded once, coolly, and took in the room with the practiced eyes of a man who runs houses and believes he can run rooms as well. Ezra Mott entered behind them. He did not look at Wolfe. He did not look at me. He stood near the door, hands folded, mouth closed, face composed, silent as ever. But the air around him was tighter tonight, as if his silence had finally begun to strain. Wolfe waited until all were seated or posted. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with the calm authority that makes even Kramer's lungs pause. This matter, Wolfe said, ends now. Todd shifted. Paige's eyes narrowed. Hank Red's expression remained smooth, but his fingers tightened lightly on the arm of his chair. Wolfe continued. Cal Mercer died from poison placed in his nightcap. The mechanism was simple. The glass was left on the hall table, and Mr. Mercer, valuing privacy, brought it into his study himself, locked the door and drank. The killer did not enter the study. He did not need to. He only needed the staff to behave normally. Hank Red said evenly, "You have no proof of that." Wolfe's gaze held him. "You will, presently, regret speaking." Hank's mouth tightened. Wolfe turned his eyes to Paige Mercer. "Miss Mercer, you have insisted Mr. Mott is loyal to you." Paige's voice was sharp. "He is," Wolfe nodded. "Yes, that loyalty has guided his silence." Paige stiffened. "What are you implying?" Wolfe's voice remained mild. "I am implying that your inheritance, your name, and your freedom have been protected by a man's silence." Quayle's face went pale. Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe lifted a hand. Mr. Quayle, be silent. You will have ample opportunity to speak to a judge later, if necessary. Kramer barked. Wolfe, get to it. Wolfe ignored him. He looked at Ezra Mott. Mr. Mott, Wolfe said softly, your silence has been interpreted by the police as obstruction. Your one statement, the master chose his own end, has been interpreted as suggesting suicide, yet the evidence indicates murder. If you do not correct the record now, you will force the police to seek an explanation that will satisfy the court and the public. Ezra's eyes stayed steady. His mouth stayed closed. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Page again. The most convenient explanation, Wolfe said, will be that you, as the heir, had motive, and that Mr. Mott, as your loyal servant, aided you by preserving a narrative of self-destruction. Page's face went white. That's insane. Kramer leaned forward, eyes hard. Accessory. Quayle started to rise. Inspector, Wolfe's voice cut him off like a blade. I will not permit this to become chaotic. He turned back to Ezra. Mr. Mott, I will be explicit. If you do not speak, I will inform Inspector Kramer that your silence constitutes protective conduct for Miss Mercer. He will arrest her as accessory, and he will be justified in doing so until the truth is established. Page stood abruptly. You cannot. Kramer's men shifted. Kramer's eyes glittered. He didn't like the idea of arresting a woman on Wolfe's say. But he liked the idea of being handed something he could use. Ezra Mott did not speak, not even then. For a second, the room hovered on the edge of violence, legal violence, which is the ugliest kind. Page's hands trembled. Todd looked like he might faint. Carla Wynn's face tightened, and even Hank Red's smooth mask faltered a fraction, as if he had not expected Wolfe to put a knife to the daughter's throat. Wolfe held Ezra's eyes. Now, he said quietly. Choose. Ezra's folded hands tightened, white knuckles, then loosened. And then he moved. He did not move toward Page. He did not move toward Wolfe. He walked straight across the room to Hank Red. The room went silent in a new way, absolute startled. Hank's eyes widened a fraction. His body tensed, as if anticipating a blow. Ezra stopped beside Hank's chair. From his pocket he produced a small object, wrapped in a handkerchief. He unwrapped it carefully, as if handling something sacred. It was a decanter stopper. Cut glass, heavy, with a faint smear on the underside where fingers had held it. I recognized it immediately. It was the stopper from Mercer's decanter, retrieved from police custody by Wolfe's request, and delivered here for this moment. Ezra did not speak. He did not accuse. He did not plead. He simply placed the stopper in Hank Red's open palm. Hank stared at it, as if it were a snake. Ezra closed Hank's fingers around it. Gently, the way you close a child's hand around a lesson. Then Ezra stepped back and returned to his post near the door, hands folded again, mouth closed again, silent as stone. But the room was no longer uncertain. Kramer surged up from his chair. What the hell is that? Wolfe's voice was calm. It is an accusation. Hank Red's face went red, then pale. This is ridiculous. He's framing me. Kramer leaned in, voice sharp now, no longer bluffing. Where'd you get that stopper, Red? You ever touch Mercer's decanter? Hank's mouth opened and closed. Of course not. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Then why are your fingerprints on it? Hank froze. That was Wolfe's gift. He didn't need to show proof in advance. He only needed to position it like bait and let panic bite. Hank's voice rose. I never. Wolfe's tone was mild. Mr. Red, you asked the security guard to test the service alarm at 2:30. You instructed that the decanter be placed on the dining room sideboard. You controlled the staff routes. You could access Miss Wynn's medication bag because you had keys. You never entered the study because you did not need to. You only needed to ensure that the glass delivered to the hall table contained poison. Hank's jaw worked. He looked at Page, desperate. She knows. Ezra, he's doing this to protect her. Page's eyes flashed. Protect me from you, Todd blurted. Hank, what did you do? Carla Wynn's voice was quiet, clinical. If he handled the stopper, he handled the decanter. If he handled the decanter, he could dose the poor. Hank snapped at her, voice cracking. Shut up. Kramer seized the moment like a man grabbing a fleeing suspect. You said you left at 8:30, then you changed it to 8:50. Which is it, Red? Hank's face was slick with sweat now. It doesn't matter. It matters, Kramer barked. Who told Ezra to leave the tray on the hall table? Hank's mouth tightened, and for the first time his perfect truth collapsed into raw evasion. I don't know. Ezra did his job. Kramer pounced. And who told Ezra what his job was? Hank's eyes darted to Quayle, to Paige, to Todd, anywhere but Wolfe. I ran the house. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. You ran it as if it were yours. Hank's face twisted. Mercer was ruining it. He was going to change the trust. He was going to cut me out, after all these years. Quayle's breath hitched. Change the trust. Hank heard himself and realized he had spoken too far. His eyes went wide. His hand clenched around the decanter stopper until the cut glass bit into his skin. Kramer's voice went low and deadly. So you killed him? Hank shook his head violently. No, I didn't mean... He took the drink himself. He always did. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You just ensured that the habit would do the killing for you. Hank's shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him, replaced by the miserable exhaustion of a man whose careful story has finally been shredded. Kramer snapped to his men. Get cuffs. Hank's head jerked up. Wait, Paige. Tell him. Paige's voice was icy. Get out of my life. Hank's mouth opened, but nothing came. He was escorted out, still clutching the stopper like a curse, until a plainclothes man pried it from his hand and bagged it. When the door closed, the room exhaled. Todd slumped. Carla Wynn looked away, as if suddenly tired of human weakness. Quayle sat rigid, already calculating damage control. Ezra Mott stood by the door, silent. Wolfe looked at him for a long moment. Then Wolfe said, softly, Mr. Mott, you did not confess. Ezra did not respond. Wolfe nodded. You pointed. He turned his gaze to Paige. Miss Mercer, your inheritance will endure scandal regardless. It is better endured with truth than with rot. Paige's eyes shimmered. She swallowed. Why didn't he? Why wouldn't he speak? Wolfe's voice was gentler than usual, which made it more striking. Because speech would have implicated you in the public mind, and because he believed silence could preserve a clean story. He looked at Ezra again. Your silence became the loudest testimony in the room. Ezra's eyes shifted to Wolfe, and for the first time there was something like relief in them. Not happiness, not peace, but the easing of a burden set down. Kramer stood, triumphant and annoyed. You set me up. Wolfe's eyes slid to him. No, Inspector, I instructed you. Kramer grunted. But he couldn't quite hide a grin. Yeah. When they were gone, Kramer, Quayle, Paige, Todd, Carla, the brownstone settled back into its proper quiet. Fritz appeared with fresh coffee, as if restoring order were his private religion. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded. It is done, he said. I looked toward the door, where Ezra Mott stood as if he might still be guarding something. Mr. Mott, I said, because I couldn't help myself. You could have saved us a lot of trouble with a sentence. Ezra's mouth moved, just once. For a second I thought he would finally speak. He didn't. But he gave me a look, steady, tired, and oddly dignified, that said he had spoken all along, in the only language he trusted. Then he turned and followed Paige out into the winter. Wolfe rose slowly, already done with human mess. Archie, he said, bring me the orchid schedule. I sighed and went upstairs, because in Wolfe's world, murder is an interruption, and orchids are the real business. And behind me, in the quiet office, the decanter stopper sat sealed in evidence, catching the lamplight like a small, hard truth that had finally been placed in the right hand.